40 Years on the Wild Side is the story of discovery, freedom, and the adventures of Terence and Ina Cotton. It's a story of how it all started and led to over 40 years of overlanding throughout southern Africa, and more trips than I can recall. Hello and welcome back to the Overland Legend. I'm Alan. In this third episode of 40 Years on the Wild Side, we rejoin the story as my dad writes about their second Land Rover, a forward control. They rebuilt this forward control into a camper and did many trips in it to the Transkei, Lesotho, Malawi, Botswana, and a couple of trips to the west coast. There was also an epic trip they did to Namibia in their long wheelbase Series 2A, and that's also featured in this episode. If you haven't seen the first two episodes, then be sure to watch those to find out how this all started. There's a link in the description below, and I'll put a link on the screen. Let's rejoin the story now.
Our second Land Rover was a 2B forward control. Land Rover had stopped production of the forward controls in the late 1960s, as they had not proved too successful as military vehicles. Nevertheless, the South African Defence Force placed an order for a couple of hundred of these vehicles in the early 1970s. Predictably, they were not used very much, and those that were auctioned had very low odometer readings. As these vehicles showed excellent potential for conversion into campers, Land Rover Club members started purchasing these vehicles direct from the army. More often than not, members requested Ina to do the bidding on selected vehicles. We also fetched the vehicles for club members from the South African Defence Force bases, which were close to our home. After one sale, we had bought about 8 vehicles belonging to various club members, and they were parked out in our front garden and on the sidewalk.
It was at these auctions that we purchased our first short wheelbase Land Rovers, and those were the two that my brother and I each got. We had a discussion about that with Brian in his video about finding out about all Brian's landies. So make sure you check out that video. There's a link in the description, and I'll also put a link on the screen. But let's get back to that forward control now.
We purchased the Series 2B 110 forward control in October 1983 for 1,300 Rand, with the odometer on 1,690. Log sheets found in the vehicle indicated that this reading was true. It was fitted with the standard 2.6 litre engine and a Series 3 gearbox and Salisbury axles. Date of dispatch from Leyland factory was 15 October 1974. Fitted as an office configuration and delivered by the coach builders to the South African Defence Force in September 1977. In order to get the vehicle running, the following had to be done. Replace 20 litres of fuel which had deteriorated, cleaned the carburetor, reconnected the plugs, tuned the engine, replaced the radiator hose. All the oil seals in the wheels were replaced, swivel hub seals replaced, chassis steam cleaned, and it was ready to go. Ina now designed and built the interior. This consists of 2 single bunks with cupboards underneath. The boys slept in 2 suspended stretchers which can be used outside. The kitchen section consists of several small-sized cupboards for storage of foodstuffs, etc., a 2-burner gas stove and a wash basin. The pots, crockery, cutlery, etc. are kept in 2 overhead cupboards. Cupboards for clothes and small items complete the furnishings. Ina completed her job by spray painting the vehicle. The vehicle has been fitted with an additional fuel tank and with an effective capacity of 90 litres. The fold-in notice board on the side of the vehicle was converted into a fold-away table. The vehicle has been fitted with a side tent. The entire cost of the vehicle worked out at just on 3,300 Rand, including a new fridge and a tent. We used this vehicle for most of our trips between the period of 1984 to 1992. It was fortunate that fuel prices at this time were not too high, as the Ford Control had a fuel consumption of 24 to 27 litres per 100 kilometres. The comfort and convenience of the vehicle, however, made the cost of fuel acceptable. We had trips to Namibia, Botswana, Lesotho, the West Coast, the Transkei, and to Malawi. We did our first trip in April 1984, a 1,800 kilometre round trip to the North Transkei coast. We had arranged to meet Frank and Aileen Dandridge at the Slab sometime that evening, about 400 kilometres from Joburg. We finally got to the Slab just before 2 a.m. in the morning, having averaged 67 kilometres an hour. About 15 minutes later we were all in bed. It was really pleasant not having to unpack before going to bed. It was only a matter of putting up the boys' stretchers, just a few minutes' work at most, and rolling out the sleeping bags. The next morning we left at about 9 a.m. We eventually reached the coast at lunchtime after negotiating some extremely poor roads. One spot in particular, the road had been so badly washed away that there was just sufficient space, with careful placing of the wheels, to get the vehicles down a hill. The last 15 kilometres of road required a fair bit of four-wheel drive and low-range work. The vehicles had no problem in the sand or mud. Our point of arrival at the sea was on the top of a hillside, and not particularly exciting, especially as Aileen would have difficulty negotiating the steep path. A young local who spoke good English offered to show us a nice beach. We duly employed him and set off, with him hanging on his own wish on the ladder at the back. We soon came to a very desolate area, which had been wind eroded and completely barren. He indicated the normal route taken around the thick sand area. We were very soon in severe difficulties. The left back wheel of the Ford Control slid off the grassy track into the sand. The vehicle threatened to fall over and down the steep slope. It took us 2 hours with the help of 10 locals who carried stones to get the vehicle back onto the track and along the slope, about 20 meters long, by digging in one side and building up the other. Lessons learned: avoid traveling on steep slopes. We subsequently found out that our destination was on the other side of the barren stretch of land, and we would have had no problem negotiating this area. We did in fact return by this route, only having a bit of difficulty getting up a very sandy bank which required 3 attempts. Frank had just 2 attempts. After then a very steep slope down to the beach, we had no full obstacles in our way. We were very impressed once we were on the beach. We had no problems getting into the dunes to make camp. The vehicle did seem to battle a bit until I realized that I was still in 2-wheel drive. We soon had a camp set up, and except for solid rain for the next 2 days, we had pleasant weather, and nobody else to disturb our peace for the next 2 weeks. We did not catch as many fish as I would have liked, due to the dirty water from the rains. However, there was an abundance of crayfish to satisfy our hunger for seafood. The swimming was particularly good and apparently very safe. There was plenty of fresh water and also a largish lagoon. In all, a very pleasant spot away from it all. The local kids were a bit of a nuisance, attempting to steal the fishing rod, but they were later banished from the beach by their mothers. The local collector of revenue caught up with us after 10 days and charged us 1 rand per day for camping. Overall, we averaged just on 27 litres per 100 kilometres and used 1 litre of oil for the 1,800 kilometre trip. We were most impressed with our vehicle and are quite happy to spend the small extra amount for petrol to enjoy the comfort of a large vehicle gives us. Our travelling costs and camping fees were less than 300 rand. A word of warning to drivers of Ford Controls: when you are stuck in the mud with the front wheel spinning, don't stick your head out the window. We were fortunate to see the finger of God on our trip in July 1987 to southern Namibia. We commented on how amazing it was that such a huge rock formation could be supported on such a small column. It collapsed December the following year. In August 1989, we went with Clive and Sylvia Crossman and Doug and Marianne Miller to the Kaokveld. The Angolan War had come to an end, and we felt quite safe to tour this area, which had in previous years been in trouble by conflict. As we had planned a long trip over 2 weeks with limited fueling points, we opted to take our Series 2 long wheelbase instead of the forward control. Clive was in his Land Rover R6, the forerunner to the 110, and Doug in his Series 3 long wheelbase. From Windhoek we made our way to Brandberg, where we saw the famous White Lady rock painting. We now travelled via Brandberg West Mine to Hope River and Gijs Spring, and eventually Sesfontein. This route was quite interesting, as back then navigation was not as easy as it is today with GPSs. We did take a couple of wrong turns. One led us into a box canyon with a substantial spring and pool at its end, an ideal spot to cool off and replenish our water supplies. We then travelled via Puros and the Red Drum to Kunene River through Marienfus Valley. On this route we came across the Himba. We found them and their living methods quite intriguing. From Marienfus we took the road to the bottom of Van Zyls Pass. 50 or so meters up the pass made us realize why its ascent by vehicle was not recommended. As our fuel was getting low, we travelled for about 10 kilometers cross-country to pick up an alternative road to Apua, saving about 100 kilometers going back via Red Drum. Instead of taking the main road across Ovambaland from Apua, we picked up a small track that took us across to Ondangwa. We found the locals to be very unfriendly, not even returning our waves. This was the first time ever in all our travels that we found such unfriendliness. So much so that we decided not to camp at sunset, but to press on to Ondangwa. Reaching the town in the dark, we asked at a tavern where we could camp. A young lady told us that it would be unsafe for us to camp out. Namibia was due to hold its first election in October, resulting in tensions amongst the followers of various parties. She arranged for us to camp in the grounds of the police station. The next day we went through the Caprivi Strip and Chobe Game Reserve to Kasane. We had 2 trips in the forward control to Namaqualand and West Coast. One was with Alan and Brian in 1987. The 2 boys travelled in at Brian's Series 2 short wheelbase, which he had recently finished. The only problem we had was when we decided to have lunch next to some large rocks on the beach. This was the first time we had ventured into the Cape beaches. What a mistake. It took us 2 hours and lots of seaweed and other debris on the beach to extricate the forward control. The other trip was with Frank and Aileen to see the flowers. It was wonderful to have Aileen with us, as she was a fundi on wildflowers and could name all those that we saw. Interestingly, this was the first time the Dandridges had seen the Namaqualand flowers in over 30 years of land roving over southern Africa. We had one memorable trip in July 1988 to Botswana in the Forward Control, again with the Fosters. We entered Botswana at Bray in the south and picked up a cut line that took us 100 kilometers in a straight line directly west of Mabuasehubi Game Reserve, where we spent a few days. This was before the reserve was incorporated into the Kalahari Transfrontier Park. There were no facilities or water and no charge. From here we went via Khansi up to the west side of the Okavango Delta to the Transkei Caves and Tsodilo Hills. We were going to go further north, but our vehicle had lost power and we were using an abnormal amount of fuel due to a burnt exhaust valve. We went to the Dandridge's house on the Borrow River just outside Maun, and in no time had the head off and a new valve fitted. We went with the Fosters to Lesotho in 1990. It was amazing how well our Forward Controls performed in the Lesotho roads. A Basotho on horseback looked in amazement when he saw two large vehicles on a difficult section of a mountain pass. When he saw the Land Rover badges on the front of the vehicles, he smiled, broadly uttering, "Ah!" The only problem that we had was with Jan's vehicle. His prop shaft disintegrated and had to be removed. He could not get up Matabeng Pass in two-wheel drive. We went up the pass, and at the top Brian, who was with us on the trip, removed our prop shaft and took it down to Jan. With the relaxed travel restrictions in South Africans, we took the opportunity in 1991 to go via Zimbabwe and Zambia to Malawi with the Foster family. I got seriously ill, which laid me flat for the return trip. As we suspected malaria, I took large doses of chloroquine. I received excellent medical attention at the missionary hospital in northern Malawi, who confirmed malaria and supplied us with other medication. As they refused to accept any payment, we sent them a donation when we got home. When we got back to South Africa, I was still not feeling well and went to the local doctor, who, in spite of having been told where we had been, declared that I had yuppie flu. 2 weeks later, I was rushed to a physician after collapsing at work. I was put on heavy doses of quinine. After a few days I was back to normal and have not had a recurrence of the disease. A major problem we had in Malawi was the number of local people and the lack of camping facilities. We arrived in Lilongwe late afternoon and could not find a suitable spot to camp. We eventually parked behind some bushes on the lawns of a park in front of the government buildings. The next morning a few early workers stared at us in amazement. We left very smartly. No matter where we stopped in the country, we very soon had dozens of Gurkhas watching our very move. It was almost impossible to take a spade to the bush. We soon discovered that all over Malawi there were large clumps of untouched bush. It was taboo for locals to enter these areas. Ideal spots for us to set up camp for the night.
It was on this trip to Malawi that my mom was sending postcards to my brother and I, because we obviously weren't there. So she was writing these postcards and writing the stories on the back, and it's quite interesting. So I'm going to have a read of those, and let's see what was happening as they were driving through Malawi. 11 July 1991. Hello Alan and Brian. We have travelled and arrived safely. Everyone very friendly. We are at Senga Hills now, going to Cape Maclear today. The lake here looks almost like the picture. The market at Lilongwe fantastic. Managed to steal a few shots. Bought you an instrument panel for 20 Rand. Lots of landies here. No fish yet because not enough time. 15 July 1991. We are at Liwonde Game Reserve still. Moving to Mulanje tomorrow. Very wild and beautiful here. Not allowed to fish in the park. Shire big river. Lots of hippo and crocs. Last road to here through the villages all the way. Everybody waves and smiles. Felt like a royal tour. Then road got smaller and smaller. Eventually a footpath with millies etc. on the side. Bridge broken, bypassed the bridge. Villagers very impressed. Game reserve only place with no people. Quite incredible. 21 July 1991. In Blantyre now, on the way to Nokato. Been on the most atrocious slippery mud and goo roads. From Tayolo to Majete. No tigers for daddy, just one small one. Malawi a bit over friendly often. Nowhere a place without people, except game reserves at 28 Rand a day for dad and me. In between parks just one great village. Hope north will be less populous. Mulanje rained but did climb. Couldn't move for 2 days after. 40 fine. Forsters broke Conrad but did fix a tea estate. Bye, Mom and Dad. Don't you just love that last line from the postcard? 40 fine, Forsters broke Conrad, but did fix a tea estate. That pretty much sums up their travelling attitude. No matter if it's a broken Conrad or a burnt exhaust valve, it just gets fixed. And it hardly makes the headline news. That's the way it went. If you enjoyed this episode, you really must watch those first 2 episodes. There'll be a link at the end of the video. In the next video, or the last one in the series, we're going to see the travels and trips from the 1990s onwards. And that was even more Land Rovers. A Land Rover caboose that my parents rebuilt into a camper, and then also an epic trip that my mom and dad did in a Series 1 88-inch that was rebuilt into a little camper. That was just amazing, and I've got some amazing footage on that. So look out for that video as the last one in this series. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Cheers.